set in made the main characters invincible flat husks, repeating the same thing over and over and running out of source material, came up with a final season of 6 episodes to tackle the biggest threat in the universe, only to do it in one dreadful episode. I have 2 nickels, which isn't a loss, but it's weird that it happened twice.
Best season ever!
Having seen the catastrophe that was season 8 of Thrones, I never imagined that a beloved franchise could burn me that bad all over again. I mean, I stuck through Tales, World Beyond, and all the other less than stellar spin-offs. How much worse could it get?
It saved you. They're the only people in danger of being killed. Well, it isn't the helpers here.
About that, it did get pretty bad. For simplicity's sake, I'll break up this video in major chunks so that we can talk about all the specific issues in isolation and how they manifest in all the different shows. And while the ones who live will be a major point of conversation, I think it'd be silly not to talk about the wider state of the franchise and why most people probably didn't even make it to the ones who live. But before we can dive into all of its failures, I think it's important to return to the thing that made it successful in the first place. I think the simplest way to summarize what I think Kirkman was going for with The Walking Dead is with 3 major points. Number 1, this is a cold, unforgiving, and brutal world where anyone can die at any moment. But number 2, in spite of that, this is a hopeful story about the future of humanity, where number 3, the apocalypse is not something that has a solution or cure or anything like that. It is a story about people set in a zombie apocalypse and how society is rebuilt from the ground up. As soon as issue 6 or episode 2 in the show, there is conflict within the group. And all of that is just wrapped up in this layer of death being around every corner that just constantly keeps you engaged. It was a beautiful balancing act of people trying to fight back against this inhuman world while also trying to retain their own humanity. Unlike a vast majority of other apocalyptic stories, there were never any inhumans. The idea of a cure is barely developed. The characters all have flaws, all of them make sacrifices. Some of them leave awfully close to just being a straight-up villain. It was a world of grays, and while we followed generally good people, they also did a whole lot of bad things. And very importantly, with a lot of those bad things, it wasn't a case of, oh, I'm doing this because I need to save everyone else. A lot of them were a whole lot more murky, and sometimes unnecessary. They were good people, sure, but sometimes they did bad things, period. Not to protect someone, not to save someone, but just out of fear and out of survival. And this leads me on to what, in my mind, is easily the most damaging thing to both The Walking Dead as well as Game of Thrones. Put very simply, I think it's prioritizing spectacle over actual story. When it comes to written work, action, fights, and all of those kinds of things are, by default, paced almost exactly the same as any normal scene, since, well, it's just words on paper, or in the case of The Walking Dead, these singular moments captured in time. But when it comes to adapting them, you will blitz through those scenes incredibly quickly because they are meant to be fast. It's action, right? That's why Game of Thrones often added filler of just random dudes fighting and lingered more on the Call of War, etc., etc. It was all just to establish stakes in this much more fluid medium. Every story needs some sort of climax, right? So it's crucial to make that rare climax actually carry weight. The problem with The Walking Dead is that it's an apocalyptic story. Resources are scarce, people are scarce, and it has established itself as a very down-to-earth setting. So with that in mind, 5-minute fistfights are an absolute no-go. This is not an action show. Random dudes shooting at each other, also a no-go. By design, it is a lot more low-key, and so establishing that climax is already a lot more tricky. And I think that's what the early seasons did incredibly well, because they only ever added filler to elevate those scarce moments of shock. Take Rick's first journey into Atlanta. In the comic, he gets surrounded, loses the source, barely gets out, and just gets eaten by Glenn. That is it. There is nothing more to the scene. It's literally just Rick barely getting out. The show, on the other hand, keeps the same exact DNA of Rick getting surrounded, losing his horse, having to fight the walkers, but he then crawls into the tank where Rick and the now very famous
And you in a tank. Cozy in there?
it adapts and pads out that moment of action without adding meaningless spectacle. This holds true for most of the early seasons. Season 2, for example, opens with a highway horn and Sophia getting lost that then leads into Carl getting shot. The comic had a whole little side story of Wiltshire where there was also a small horn, but the point is, the show simply adds a bit more intensity to set up that big moment of Carl getting shot. 10 out of 10, no complaints. That's exactly how you should adapt stories. Replicate the feel and the themes, but enrich it. But the problem is spectacle, and with The Walking Dead, that escalation is extremely clear. In case you've never read the comics before, I want you to keep in mind that unless I mention it, this probably does not happen in the comic. I'll return to this point, but Season 2 ends not with the survivors just leaving the farm because the winter is setting in, but rather because there's a huge horde, a huge battle, and the whole thing just burns down. Watching it for the first time? Yeah, 10 out of 10, no complaints. Cool season finale, it makes sense, why not? Why shouldn't it burn down? And it's really not that wild. The season started with the horde, so the horde actually making their way over to the farm because of the helicopter and whatnot makes sense. It is just spectacle, but it is spectacle that does enrich the original story. Season 3, we infiltrate Woodbury and conduct a whole raid on them. Okay, our survivors are quite a bit more experienced now, and we also had insider intel. Sort of makes sense. Cut to the season finale. The governor has a grenade launcher. Spicy, but still makes sense. They found the military guys, right? And this is still relatively early on in the apocalypse. Season 4, the governor has a tank. The same exact thing as in the comic. Oh, wait, it actually shoots. That's cool, but also very over the top, especially Daryl just lobbing in a grenade. But okay, it's definitely a bit too actiony, but Rick is still brutally beat up. Will lose the prison completely, Herschel dies, and it's real bad. So yeah, they have massively upped the spectacle of this whole ordeal, but it has value. Season 5, a totally new story of Carol soloing Terminus. Definitely.
How I feel about my thoughts. Sus. Waterproof shoes and comfort typically don't go together. More on some change now. Meet the title sleeper. The title is designed for people who are always on the go. What makes the title special? They're fully weathered, lighter, with our most impact resilient insole that gives you full rebound and maximum cushioning when hitting all your subsystems. All. Wow. You don't have to worry about changing shoes because they're small for the ride. They're waterproof. They're waterproof. I'm not.
ShareFile. It's designed to automate everyday tasks, make onboarding smoother, deliver customizable tools, while keeping client data secure. ShareFile. Document sharing, e-signing, and workflows.
More than a little goofy, definitely leading a little too much into action and starting to lose a bit of its identity. Especially because none of this really amounts to anything. They're captured, they fight back, and they escape with 0 losses in a single episode. Oh hey, would you look at that? This is still the most viewed episode in the entire Walking Dead run. What a fascinating coincidence. I think you see what I'm getting at. The show just keeps upping its action over and over, even if it just straight up does not exist in the comic book. When it gets like really bad in season 6 to 8, No Way Out happens both in the books as well as the TV show, purely a question of survival. It's also important to note that in the comic book, we never had that big prison alliance with like Woodbury and stuff. So in the book, this also tests Rick's leadership of this very big community. But more generally speaking, it tests Alexandria, which Rick thought to be weak. It tests the future of this newfound alliance. And because this is still Kirkman, we of course also lose a very major character with Morgan. The show, on the other hand, has a whole side adventure with Daryl and his RPG. Yeah, like, we are definitely starting to go more than a little bit overboard. Then the show just completely skips an entire volume of Carl coming to terms with literally being shot in the face just to get to Negan faster. Like seriously, he gets shot and the next episode opens with what? Actually, yes, Carl. What? And with Negan, oh boy. If you've watched my big retrospective series, you'll be sick of hearing this, but the show literally took the Saviors' numbers in the comic book and just like 10x them. There is a fine line between increasing their numbers to make them feel even scarier and increasing their numbers to the point that there are so many of them that is just meaningless. Remember what I said about this being a story set in an apocalypse where resources are scarce? These conflicts completely drain all of their defenses. That is one of the things that the TV show massively improved over the comic book. There is a whole Cold War between the prison group and Woodbury. The moment the Saviors appear on screen, that is completely forgotten. Just in season 6, Daryl RPGs all the dudes on the road. We mow down the entire satellite group. There's another small group with the whole Carol capture thing. And speaking of Carol, she too mows down a whole bunch of dudes. Do you know what actually summarizes this very, very well? It's actually in the finale, like that scene of us crossing the corner, there's like 10 dudes. We cross another corner, there's like 100 dudes. We cross another corner, it's like 1,000 dudes. Those are the Saviors, they just multiply. And actually, very funny little goofy fact, there are so many of them that you can spot extras being reused. As in, they die in the episode, but they eventually come back in the background. Season 7 and the constant meaningless bickering with Jadis is a whole different can of worms, but when we get to the finale, it's just... I don't even know how to describe it. It's like the most cringeworthy Avengers moment imaginable. This is The Walking Dead. The book's entire March to War storyline is about Eugene making ammunition, and their plan fails. The show completely disregards that, and we just have everyone running on an open street, shooting into nowhere. Even like music-wise, this carries a completely different tone.
Want to get out of here?
They could regroup. We can't take the chance he's not gonna stop.
And returning to that shooting point, don't get me wrong, you could always nitpick their aim in the series. Whenever they're shooting walkers, they're like 007 accuracy. When it was shooting people, suddenly everyone turned into stormtroopers. That's not a problem with just The Walking Dead, it's really a problem with action in general. But this, in one fell swoop, it completely removed any weight that this conflict could have had. In my mind, this makes about as much sense as John Beyond the Wall. The goal of this whole thing is exactly the same as it was in the book. We ambush Negan. But the themes and the grit is completely sacrificed for the sake of this meaningless spectacle of people just running down the streets. Genuinely, the Alliance just appearing feels like Avengers. This is not The Walking Dead. But Season 8 said hold my beer, because not only is it completely dumb, meaningless action, it is also mind-numbingly inconsistent. The Ezekiel story is all about his entire squad being wiped out by the big spooky 50 cal machine gun. Literally, their entire squad obliterated in a matter of seconds. Well, time to deploy Rick and Daryl, because they are also shot at by a 50 caliber machine gun on an open road for a good few minutes. Ignoring the fact that Rick's car would have been Swiss cheese, Daryl pulls up and one-taps the dude with a pistol. And now you're going to tell me that this gun is super dangerous? My suspension of disbelief doesn't quite go that far. Like, at this point, you're just telling me, just don't pay attention, just don't look at the screen. I don't know. This is like if Danny's Dragons suddenly went from indiscriminate nukes that literally melt buildings to highly precise targeted fires. Wait a minute. Season 8 also completely forgets that little fact that...
Look, I was gonna go easy on you.
I'm not taking any chances.
Metro Plus Health. We help you zero in on what matters. $0 copays, $0 mental health, $0 birth control. Let's check $0 healthcare off your list today. Check if you qualify at metroplus.org.
Ammunition is a problem, and we just shoot, and shoot, and shoot some more, and then a little bit more. And I feel like I need to stress this. I'm not saying ammunition is a problem just because it was a problem in the comic book. Ammunition is a problem in the show. We're gonna jump over the rest of season 8 because it's just more of the same, but the season finale just says, you know what? Somehow they returned. And after the war, in which hundreds have already been killed, this happens. I don't even care about the fact that none of the guns were tested. All of them actually blew up, etc., etc. I don't even care about any of that anymore. Just the sheer number of people makes everything here completely and utterly meaningless. We fought a war. Where do they keep spawning? Season 9 is actually a little bit better about this, but seasons 10 and 11 are once again just beyond dumb, and The Ones Who Live is, oh boy. We spend years and years, even have an entire spin-off to convey the strength of the CRM. The season opens by saying Rick has tried to escape like 7 times or whatever, and even cutting his own hand off failed. Oh, and by the way, I'm guessing a bunch of you might not have even seen The Ones Who Live, so the super TLDR about the CRM military is that they're this super militaristic unit who has a whole big plan of restarting civilization. Problem is, they've run the numbers and realized we don't quite have enough resources for that, so what we're going to do is kill a bunch of people and basically start from scratch in these highly secured safety zones. And by highly secured, we're talking like missiles, countless soldiers, helicopters, fuel out the wazoo apparently, and the list just goes on. They have like literally everything you could ever want and a little bit more. I'm simplifying here, but after all of that, after spending like 8 years with zero possibility of escape, everything just so happens to line up so that Rick and Michonne can just blow up all the soldiers in a single afternoon. And Rick also face tanks a grenade. Remember how a grenade was our only way out of the CDC? The whole bulletproof glass thing and all that? Yeah, actually, maybe I'm wrong. Rick had a couple of walkers in front of him. I'm sure they'll absorb the grenade. And again, the worst part about everything in the CRM is that it means nothing. It changes nothing. Very, very simple question. What is Rick's agency in the CRM? How does his story actually change and develop? He tried to escape a bunch of times and failed. Cool, makes sense, very brutal. So what does he do? Does he make sacrifices? Is he forced to think selfishly to get back to his family? What does he do? Well, Michonne is now there, so they just kill everyone and then try to escape and succeed. Spoilers for The Last of Us and the season 1 ending. If you don't want to hear this, skip to this time. Let's look at Joel and Ellie. The ending of The Last of Us has Joel choose Ellie, one person, over the future of humanity, over the potential of curing everyone, of potentially putting an end to the apocalypse completely. I know a bunch of people have created like entire scientific breakdowns of why Ellie couldn't have actually made a cure, yada yada, but Joel hasn't seen any of those YouTube essays, so for him, it is Ellie or the human race. It doesn't matter what it is in reality, it matters what's going on in his head and his agency in that moment. But yes, that is a very, very heavy choice that people debate to this day. Rationally speaking, obviously he should have chosen the human race. Emotionally speaking, and most parents say this, they would have chosen Ellie every single day of the week. So with that in mind, let's get back to Rick. So the briefing is essentially, we don't have enough supplies for a whole big thought out timeline, and we're going to kill people to make up the difference. So it's a life or death question for a bunch of completely innocent people, and this is a tyrannical military organization doing this just because it doesn't fit their timeline. First of all, if you want to create a trolley problem, you need some sort of point of reference. A lot of people means nothing in a person's mind. But that's not even the worst part, because the trolley problem we have here is A, we're going to go out and kill people, which by the way, very morally complex. I think we can sit here and debate whether or not this is a good thing for a very long time. Definitely. Or B, we're going to let a whole bunch of people starve. Effectively, they're still going to die. Oh, and the cherry on top, these people who are doing the very morally great thing of going out and literally hunting people down also enslave a bunch of people, and there's also this whole thing where you can like literally never leave, and if you had anyone you cared about on the outside, they're literally going to die. Very, very morally gray indeed. And my favorite thing, remember how with Negan, we...
Whatever you do it for less at Harbor Freight.
Didn't go to war right away because Rick was just afraid of losing so many people. Like, it's a war. A lot of people are going to die, right? Yeah, well, with the world's most powerful military, all it takes is a single afternoon of Rick and Michonne's time. Okay, I lied. My favorite part is what actually happens after. A literal voiceover of what happened.
With the CRM's frontliner force and the CRM force command, including Major.
Remember what I said about the two Nickels? Yeah, this is literally the Night King, but with even less casualties and less cost. What I think happened is they wrote themselves into a corner and had no clue how to wrap it up without having the most meaningless big explosion that just kills all baddies and saves us. I genuinely think they had to write a story that was big in scope since it didn't allow Rick to escape, but they simply couldn't write a proper solution that would actually make sense. This is Rick Grimes, right? He's been in prison here for 8 years. What kind of solution could you think of for him taking down the world's most powerful military? Oh, and by the way, like speaking of themes, I also did mention the fact that Thunder Spears, yeah, those are now a thing. I also did mention the fact that Rick's helicopter literally blows up. Oh, and by the way, the explosion happens inches from Rick, but he's unscathed. Remember the Season 3 helicopter? I also did mention the fact that they jump out of the helicopter, but they were apparently flying super low and landed in water. Only the show doesn't actually show any of that because reasons. But it looked cool, so they had to jump out of the helicopter. It absolutely should stay in. When we're following the main characters in 99.9% of shows, of course we know they're going to win. A good writer's job is to create a sense that maybe they won't. The ones who live didn't even attempt to construct that illusion. Rick and Michonne fly over there and literally just blow it up. But okay, one last thing I want to mention is that it's not just the senseless escalation that's the problem. Because in the main show, and we'll get to this in a second as well, there are rare times where the episode is quite literally just the spectacle. What I mean by that is like the episode's core appeal is just that something cool happens. It doesn't really progress the story in any meaningful way or anything, it's just something shiny. Let's look at season 11, an absolute mess of a season where the production didn't even know that that was actually the final season and they had to write around that, but you know, whatever. Let's look at the Connie House of Horrors episode. It's directed by the legend Greg Nicotero himself, and Connie is easily one of the best additions to the cast post-Rick's access. But the thing is, while the episode doesn't have some infinite ammo, 300 people nonsense, it still lacks any substance. As it stands, it genuinely feels like the writers were sitting around a table, someone threw out the idea of these feral people living inside a horror mansion, everyone agreed that it sounds very cool, and that's where the conversation ended. The episode looks incredible and is very scary because of course it is, it's Greg Nicotero, but that's it. And don't get me wrong, a completely disconnected side adventure can be incredible. It can enrich the world in like a dozen different ways. I mean, look at Avatar: The Last Airbender. So the question that arises is, what sets apart Avatar from The Walking Dead? And the answer is surprisingly simple. Avatar actually has a coherent story. For simplicity's sake, keep this in mind for now, we'll return to this point. But moving on, and I've already blurred the lines a little bit here because as much as I talk about this meaningless spectacle in terms of action, it also inevitably translates into dumb over-the-top characters. Like for example, if Rick is meant to single-handedly mow down 30 dudes just because this conflict is going to be very, very big, Rick also sort of becomes John Wick, right? Promise this is going to be relevant for The Walking Dead, but this is where I want to bring up Game of Thrones. I think one of the biggest issues a show can ever have is breaking the illusion that this world that the story is painting truly exists and that we are merely looking in. You know how people often say, I could get lost in that book, I could get lost in this world, I could get lost in this game? That's what I mean. It's just very strong escapism, which is very good because it's more than just like a raw thing that has been made. It's an actual experience. And what I mean by breaking that illusion is when productions start to deliberately pander to the audience. If done poorly, it immediately turns it from a world you could get lost in to a produced bit of content that you can almost interact with. This is no longer a world where you're just peeking in and seeing what happens. This is a world where if enough people like something, it's probably not going to go away. With Game of Thrones, I think Bronn is a very good example. His arc was basically complete, but he keeps appearing just because the audience liked the actor and the character. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you have substance for that character and they don't just become this marketable action figure. Running around, what's the problem? Fan service, no, not that kind of fan service, settle down, is not a bad thing. You should service the fans, but it has to go beyond just a token gesture. In Walking Dead terms, this is obviously Daryl. Like, Daryl undermines every single right hand Rick was supposed to have from the comic books. A slightly different, but I think even more explicit example of this is Jon himself. Martin has talked plenty about his love of Tolkien's work and the profound impact it has had on A Song of Ice and Fire. But one thing he has said that he really dislikes is how Gandalf dies, only to return as an even more powerful wizard. In the Tolkien lore, it of course makes perfect sense, but I think you understand what he's getting at. Martin always believed that if a dead character were to be brought back to life, there should be some profound impacts. Death is something so fundamental, so primal to life, that it should change a person, well, fundamentally. So, in the TV series, Jon Snow dies and comes back to life, and nothing changes. Why? Well, because he's a good guy doing good things and he can do no wrong because he's our protagonist pushing the story along. He is stuck in a situation that absolutely means certain death. Nope, he is saved by something, someone, but he lives. You can call this plot armor, but I think it's actually worse than that, because it'd be bad if they just survived everything. But the problem is that their mistakes are also not meaningfully punished. And the same goes for so many of The Walking Dead's characters. I understand why after Andrew and Denai left the show, they were a little more hesitant on killing characters, but season 10, there is a horde in a cave. Carol is on a warpath, so she and the entire group that was sent searching for her fall into said cave. The whole thing blows up, collapses, walkers are everywhere, and nothing happens. All the fan favorites get out completely scratch-free, and the rest just get a good old fake-out death and reappear some sooner, others later. This entire big cave story, that obviously wasn't in the comic book because it literally contributes nothing to the story, is there for the simple reason of seeming kinda cool. And again, this is not even about the spectacle. This is about none of these characters ever facing any fallout for any of this. In the comic book, one mistake meant someone dies. Simple as that. This is a punishing world. You cannot run into the literal enemy's base and nothing happens. And with that in mind, let us return to the ones who live, because this is crystal clear in the short season. There's this scene right here. We are like 12-ish years into the apocalypse. This group that we meet has presumably survived in the wild for 12 years, and they come upon Rick and Michonne.
Appreciate the help, but we're gonna need more.
Why don't you just promise and we'll believe you?
Why would you care about saving anybody's skin other than your own? You look after you.
If I hadn't seen Denai and Andrew act before, I genuinely think this is an acting problem. But no matter how good the actors are, this script is dreadful. Season 4 began with a single woman leading Rick to her zombified husband and trying to feed him to him. That was barely a year into the apocalypse. This is 12 years. They outnumber them, and they also have weapons, which doesn't really make sense. But what I'm getting at is it's not just Rick and Michonne leveling up. Everyone else has also lived in the same apocalypse, you know? But what happens? Well, they fall to the floor and basically say, "Oh my god, I never thought people like you existed. You are so good, please help me." And speaking of this point of just not great dialogue, trying to hammer you over the head that Rick and Michonne are good, very good.
In a dead world, love is dead.
Is it going to be Dan or me? Me or Dan?
Love doesn't die.
Watch.
The problem is not that this is a catchphrase, like the whole "We are the Walking Dead" is also a catchphrase. The problem with this is that no human being would ever say this. Like, you just killed a person, you turn to them and say, "Love doesn't die." Who does that? A couple of months ago, I would have been just plain confused, but after reading that whole thing about HBO playing with the idea of filming Game of Thrones in vertical, I am almost led to believe that could this be like trying to make clippable moments? Like, the line is so bad and so out of context that surely this isn't the same Walking Dead that had Rick and Herschel talking about the world and what remains of it, right? This show is like 10 times more comic booky than the comic book, and I do not understand it. How is the...
The web addresses experts need that inspire confidence. Stand out among the professionals. Create your .pro web address at name.com/pro.
comic book with Negan, who swears every 2.3 words, so much more realistic than the show. But okay, let's return to our group of low-level NPCs, because they, plus Jadis, surround Rick and Michonne. Surprise, Walker pops out of the blue, everyone dies, and we then press E to continue, and Jadis delivers her dying monologue.
Everything I've ever was tired. My old one, and my new one. didn't kill you all. Somehow, some way you come. I thought my death, it was worth it. The CRM will bring the world back. I wish I died an artist. We found this. We wanted to give it to you.
Every single character in both this show, as well as later seasons of the main show, feel like NPCs designed to interact with the main character and then just cease to exist. It doesn't even attempt to paint a consistent world. For another, slightly unrelated but also related example, let's pop on over to New York. There's the scene where our alliance is meeting the Bad Alliance, so Negan will be unleashed to scare the Bad Alliance. Thing is, the Bad Alliance knows that the Good Alliance is very weak, so Negan is almost single-handedly trying to pull something here. I can't show you the full scene because copyright, but what they're trying to emulate here is obviously the Negan lineup from the main show. Big Bad Negan scares everyone and everyone runs away. But again, this is a decade plus into the apocalypse. Negan does not have hundreds of people surrounding them as he did with Rick's group. He is a single dude spouting nonsense, but he still just scares everyone off. And that's not even mentioning the whole gimmicky nature of this entire setting with these weird grappling guns. Their entire group are also wearing masks. It feels so artificial and so out of place in a setting like The Walking Dead that, to me, it's impossible to take seriously. But while I brought up Daryl a second ago, I think Negan is kind of even more of a brawn in that comparison. Because why is he around? His arc ended years ago, and then it ended again years ago, and then it ended again years ago. Well, honestly, because everyone likes JDM, he's a really, really good actor, so we're just gonna repeat the same storyline with Maggie a dozen times. As opposed to the comic where, he's effectively left to rot completely alone because, he's an evil man. Not only does it not really make any sense from a purely this is an apocalypse with hardened people perspective where Negan isn't some walking myth, it also kind of diminishes the entire Negan conflicts. If you happen to be writing an essay about bringing back characters for no reason and you need more examples, just watch Fear the Walking Dead. The final season can be summarized with a sentence of, somehow, insert name, returned. And there, I think the problems actually converge to create an even worse version of this, because not only is everyone immune, the show actively indulges in that immunity for the sake of spectacle. What I mean by that is you see someone blow up, like they literally die, but don't worry, they're gonna be fine. And is that over and over and over. I think a simple way of getting my point across is that these characters literally have titles in universe. Like, I am sorry, this is not Game of Thrones. I don't think Maggie should be known as the Widow across the whole of the US. It's just goofy. Imagine if every villain after Terminus called Rick the Ringleader. Why? I don't know why. Why not? And also, please, when you're stabbed in the shoulder, it should kind of leave a wound, You shouldn't do hero landings 15 seconds later, but fine, whatever, I guess. To try to summarize these two very, very big points, I truly don't know how this happened, but by season 7 especially, I think the show just completely lost its grit and its weight. It was just spectacle with very little substance, and the characters are either or can just do no wrong regardless of what happens. And the best part, if they do something shady, well, an NPC will pop up to tell you that they are still good. Remember that random kid with 10 minutes of screen time who literally spawned in to tell the audience that Negan is now good? Yeah, me neither. Well, actually, I do remember him. I remember him very well because it was very goofy, but you shouldn't remember him because he was an NPC. But the worst part about this whole spectacle thing that you're probably not going to see until it's already too late is that it's a death spiral. If Rick has become a Giga Chad, he can never not be a Giga Chad. You can never pull back anymore, so the action just has to get bigger and bigger and bigger to the point of being comedic. But alright, that's all super big picture stuff. Maybe I'm just being a boomer and don't realize that, quote-unquote, modern audiences want to see a ton of action 24/7 with little to no regard for the setting. Okay, so let's zoom in and talk about another big problem The Walking Dead has. Its constant, desperate attempts to set up some grand mystery only for all of them to mean literally nothing. The Walking Dead is not Attack on Titan or Game of Thrones with its prophecies and whatnots. The comic book does have quite a bit of foreshadowing, but it never tries to fake this perception of there being some grand design behind it. I think Martin himself describes this very well. He's often talked about how there are two types of authors, the architects and the gardeners. Architects are the type who plan out, if not absolutely everything, then most of the story before ever putting pen to paper. Probably the simplest examples are like crime/mystery authors, but Tolkien too fits the architect description. I think you'll agree that coming up with an entire language, like dozens of religions and wars and like a whole universe just to write a children's book is sufficient planning. But then there's the gardener. This type of author obviously still has some idea of where the story is going, but they let it grow naturally. Martin puts himself in this camp, and I think Kirkman too is very much a gardener. It just makes perfect sense for a story like The Walking Dead. By design, it was a realistic apocalypse that never ends. So instead of coming up with some massive overarching plots, Kirkman focused on themes, characters, and really allowed you to experience the world. And that's where I think the show once again went directly against what it was meant to be. I think around seasons 4 to 5-ish, and especially with the whole CRM stuff, the writing really tried to lean into this whole super artsy, everything is a sign type of writing. Let me make one thing clear. I am very much a weird, surreal dream sequence enjoyer. Rick talking on the phone? Sign me up. Zombie Lori? Sign me up. The entire traumatic Negan lineup? Sign me up. Rick's entire death episode? Sign me up. Ditto for the lengthy flashbacks. Here's Not Here is easily one of my favorite episodes of season 6. So with everything I'm going to talk about in a second, it's not about making things abstract, but more so about planting these false promises. Easily the most notable ones are just all the A's. In season 4 and 5, I think you can just interpret it as this overarching symbol of Rick being trapped. It appears on the train carts, then the hunters painted on the wall, and later A for Alexandria is also this weird reminder of that entrapment. As a small little callback, it makes sense, and it's a cool little detail for viewers wanting to overanalyze everything. I am one of them. But then they decided, you know what? A is everything. A is for the wolves. A is for Daryl's shirt. Jadis' A. The CRM helicopter A. Oh, and we planned it all along. The A actually now has a meaning in the CRM. If you really wanted to make sense, of course you can jump through hoops and just describe it as this recurring motif of danger throughout the series, but to me, it seems like this lazy, cryptic thing that they just kept tossing in there to keep people asking questions that ultimately lead to something completely unrelated. It's just smoke and mirrors. It's just there to string you along with the promise of some grander mystery. And don't get me wrong, I understand that everything I'm saying right now is ridiculous. I'm complaining about a random cryptic letter. I get that, it's ridiculous, but the follow-up question is, why is it there then? This is there for people wanting to analyze the show, but ultimately, none of it is in any way related. In a weird way, this is like insulting the audience's intelligence because it's like, oh, you spent all this time wondering about what it could be. Well, surprise, it's a whole different community. All of it is connected. You could never know that. Why are you presenting it as this grand thing that doesn't have a solution? It's just not fun. And the best part, this happened again, because the same goes for Heath's disappearance and the highly spooky PPP card. So, let's break it down. The real reason for Heath disappearing is because the actor wanted to leave the show. That is it. People speculated that the PPP card might be foreshadowing the Whisperer, since PPP in music means very, very quiet, as in whispering. We've had a very clear Negan foreshadowing before, so it makes sense. But no, because apparently it's a CRM thing, and you just have to trust it because it's the showrunner saying it. There is no indication of that ever happening, but it's a thing. And then that PPP thing is spliced in Tales of the Walking Dead as another blink and you'll miss moments. And eventually it pops up on a whiteboard in The Ones Who Live. So the question that arises is, clearly it's in some way connected with the CRM. It says like some sort of weird PPP exception. What does that mean? What happened to Heath? Well, I'll quote Scott Gimple. It's like, with the CRM, there's a huge myth.
Oh, wow. Full. I struggle to get air when it's coming down. Oh, I need a break. I'm good to go. We can assure you
Apology to it, but the thing is, and I don't want to tell it, but if things change and you haven't released that much, you can pivot. But I will say is just sitting on a shelf right now, and this really great mythology that might apply to something very, very soon. So basically, it means absolutely nothing until they make stuff up, so please keep watching, please. There's something more. It might apply to something very, very soon. Please keep watching. These are literally people on Twitter just posting like cryptic tweets of something is coming soon. I do that myself sometimes because it's very funny, but that's not how you write a story. And the thing is, if it wasn't for the A's, I'd be like, okay, maybe you've thought of something. But the thing is, after you make a whole overly dramatized thing about a literal community's fate being decided by a coin toss in the episode, this is not like out of the show, we actually see this, only for the showrunner to reveal what happened after the show ends. Nothing happened, by the way. Like, I'm sorry, I put more trust in my cat foreshadowing the weather than I do The Walking Dead at this point. is just red herrings gone rogue. A bunch of them are often just straight up inconsistent. A whole bunch of them are complete afterthoughts, retconning half the show. Like Smart Walkers, by the way. People were cooking up lore reasons in season 1, but there is no lore reason. That was just a Frank Darabont creative decision. The Walkers in the comic never had any sort of intelligence, nor do they have any sort of intelligence after Darabont left the show. It's not like their brains decaying or anything like that. Like, we would have seen fresh people turning also exhibit intelligence, but we never see that. That was just a blatant retcon just because showrunners changed. That is until season 11, where once again, false promise of Aaron suddenly saying, "I've actually heard stories of them." Now, if some of you made it this far into the video and haven't watched the show yourself, buckle up, because not only did they retcon Smart Walkers out of existence, they retconned them back in, only for them to not even do anything meaningful. Why did they do that? Because please keep watching. In the wider lore, there are special walkers in Europe. We promise, keep watching, please. But wait, I hear you say, a lot of the stuff you keep talking about are entirely external events. There was nothing they could do. The reason why Oceanside didn't show up is because the show was cancelled and they had to work around it. The PPP card was also the actor leaving the show. Yes, you're absolutely right. The same as Rick was airlifted out because Andrew Lincoln wanted to leave the show. The same as Michonne disappearing because Denai got the bag from Marvel. Big W, by the way. And the same as Maggie leaving because she also became a super cop. Another big W. So yes, criticizing external events is kind of goofy, right? But also kind of not, because another problem the show has, like after season 7, is that they never commit to anything. An architect plans out everything. A gardener develops the story based on current circumstances. The Walking Dead does neither, because it sets up this whole PPP card without ever knowing whether Heath will return. Remember season 5 and all those spontaneous deaths that just reminded us that this world is dangerous? A bunch of those stories, yes, they were abruptly cut short, but it makes sense in the world that is The Walking Dead. That is what a gardener should do. If an actor wants to leave, kill them off. With Andrew, Denai, and Lauren, they got very lucky because all of them actually decided to return. But what if Whiskey Cavalier was never cancelled and Maggie never returned? Or better yet, what if after the development hell that was the movie trilogy, Rick and Michonne never got a proper conclusion? Rick was airlifted out, sure, whatever, but Michonne's story would have ended with her leaving her children behind to literally try to find a dude in the middle of a zombie apocalypse only to never return. This is the same world where we lost Dale, who too wanted to leave the show, by the way, on a regular evening stroll. We lost Tyrese with the entire group still around. The world where Noah was torn apart because of a single weak link. But no, we are a decade into the apocalypse and everyone goes off on their own adventures because they can solo the world. Apparently. They outscaled the scaling, okay?
Why don't you go and find out yourself? Send me a postcard.
Honestly, my theory is that they killed off Carl, who was the obvious future of the show, and by the way, no, Chandler didn't want to leave the show, he didn't go to college or whatever else people have come up with. He literally bought a house nearby to make filming more sustainable long term. And his parents also roasted Gimple for a few months, which was very funny, but no, he was fired. But that's beside the point. I think they killed him off and sort of realized that, hold up, we don't really have anywhere to go. Like, Sophia is no longer in the show, she's still in the comics.
There's an expression in Arabic. First we come for the Saturday people, then we come for the Sunday people. So first we will rid the land of the Jews. But don't worry, Christians, we're coming for you next. My name is Gad Saad, and this is my story. I am a professor, author, and evolutionary behavioral scientist. So I was born in Beirut, Lebanon in 1964. We were part of the last remaining dwindling community of Lebanese Jews. But in terms of my childhood growing up in Lebanon, it was a happy childhood, although several elements made it less than ideal. Certainly from a Jewish perspective, I experienced Jew hatred on countless occasions. For example, when I was almost 6 years old.
Carl is no longer in the show. He's still in the comics. We sort of don't have anything that represents the next generation, you know? So when it comes to character deaths, I think they never committed because what if someone else wants to leave and we don't have any more main characters? Like, at least there is a chance of bringing someone back, right? And so yeah, Rick blows up, but is airlifted out. People leave left, right, and center, and then the show just gives up on show don't tell and just tells us that they were doing something somewhere, and now they're back. It's just so shallow. You just can't tell a story like this without ever committing to anything. Well, to be fair, I guess they did commit to something, and that was killing the entire future of the story by killing off Carl, off screen, for some reason. Yeah, everyone else though, they're vibing. Someone who isn't exactly vibing though are AMC themselves. If you've been following the behind-the-scenes stories for a while, you'll know that Frank Darabont, the original showrunner, sued AMC over profit sharing. And more recently, Robert Kirkman himself, along with a number of producers, also sued AMC. From a purely viewer perspective, a bunch of that is completely irrelevant to us. It just deals with like residuals and payments, but it's kind of boring stuff. But the thing that is important is, one, AMC's relationship with Kirkman, the literal creator of this franchise, and two, the effect it's already had on all the spin-offs. Starting with the latter, correlation is of course not causation, and also keep in mind that I am by no means a legal professional and my only consultant is ChatGPT. But from what I gather, AMC settled one of the lawsuits where one of the terms is that profits from both Fear the Walking Dead and The Walking Dead would have to be shared with the plaintiffs. Coincidentally, both shows ended almost immediately, and what followed are all the other spin-offs which are not covered in this legal documents. Keep in mind that legal proceedings are even slower than The Walking Dead Season 7. It's funny, goofy, get into Walking Dead reference. But it takes a very long time. You can see these things coming and you can pivot. So people hoping for an official Walking Dead Season 12, it's almost certainly not going to happen because they'd have to share profits. Instead, if they make a spin-off called The Walking Dead, Rick Grimes Searches for Daryl Dixon, the book of Ricky Doodog Grimes, the one who lives, then it's all good. The point I'm getting at is that by not having the main title of The Walking Dead, you're splintering the audience big time, and that is very bad for business. But I do think it's important to note that I might be reading tea leaves here. I mean, the show of The Walking Dead did kinda sorta adapt all the comic book, right? I do think that if they could, they'd probably just keep making the main show. Like, it wouldn't be the first time they come up with completely new stories, but maybe they really just ended it. I don't think so because of the surprise cancellation, but maybe. But much, much more importantly for me, I want to talk about the first point. Even before The Walking Dead was turned into a live-action show, so this is like 2008 to 2010-ish, Kirkman said multiple times that he is interested in making a Walking Dead anime/animation/call it whatever. But even more importantly, as recently as December and this April, he has discussed AMC's interest in doing something like that, and later stating that he'd want to do it, but that he would have to get the rights back from AMC. I've talked a bunch more about this on my second channel, but money-wise, I think a renewed collaboration between Kirkman and AMC for a 100% faithful comic adaptation does make sense. Looking at something like Google Trends, none of the spin-offs have even remotely reignited interest in The Walking Dead as a whole. Even focus communities like Reddit, all of the top upvoted posts are all like 7-8 years ago. None of those are really recent. But then again, would AMC even budge on, like not including Daryl, for example? Hard to say, so I think the only way this would really work is if Kirkman really has 100% creative control. Otherwise, I mean, we'd be doing the same thing. The TV series was a comic book adaptation. It just became very different, especially with stuff like Daryl, right? So redoing it with these changes that were in the TV version is completely redundant. With the colored version of the comic book still trucking along, there definitely seems to be sustained interest in more comic material. Invincible has been doing incredibly well on Amazon, and just about every streaming platform is now fighting tooth and nail for exclusivity on anime properties. So again, purely money-wise, I think this is something that could happen, and to me, that is the only bit of franchise that I think I'd actually be interested in now. I think the unfortunate part around that is that a lot of people tend to throw out these reboots bad, adaptations bad, zombie genre fatigue, or whatever else, but every single metric disproves that. Reboots and adaptations, regardless of the finish.
And how are the numbers looking?
We're landing at a strong 70. Ooh, SPF.
Thanks to JetBlue's low fares, Kayla's in vacation mode already.
Your team is the last global gunslingers of a bygone era.
All stations, weapons free.
The nature of our enemy is unclear now. What do you want us to do about it? Protect us. Time we had a chat.
Unlock the Vault Edition today.
Products just juice up the original. Recent example, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Source, that big spike on Google Trends. Another example, One Piece. Big spike in Western markets once live action was released. Another recent example, Invincible. So whether it was originally animated, originally a manga, and has an anime, or is just a comic, it is still a net positive for the IP as a whole. So again, money-wise, it makes perfect sense to me. And with the zombie genre fatigue, I don't think this is true either. I think what people mean when they say they're sick of zombie material is just the same zombie material. The number one complaint of The Last of Us was the lack of infected. Most of the infected were obviously in the gameplay sections, and they sort of cut a lot of that, so they were really, really sparse. Thing is, just like The Last of Us, The Walking Dead is not a story about the zombies, so as long as the primary plot is strong, a good backdrop of the apocalypse is just the cherry on top. Same thing goes for video games, by the way. I think when most people say genre fatigue, it's just because the idea in that genre has gotten stale. But that's beside the point. What I'm getting at is that I think the TV universe is very much struggling. From the numbers that are available, it's still pulling okay figures, but I mean, compared to everything it did before and compared to most other big TV shows nowadays, it's very, very rough. But the thing is, there is this gold mine in the comic book just sitting there. Personally, I don't see a future for this IP without like a big House of the Dragon moment where we actually return to the heart and soul of what made it what it was. Killing people and then telling them that love doesn't die, that's like Far Cry levels of insanity. It's not really The Walking Dead. If I was prone to conspiracies, I could almost believe that the title of The Ones Who Live could even be a personal slight against Kirkman, since it's kinda the complete inverse of what Kirkman did with that. But yeah, having slept on it, having thought about it for a good few weeks now, I do think The Walking Dead, and especially The Ones Who Live, has actually beaten Game of Thrones for just how much it disrespects the source material. I think the reason people tend to really focus on Thrones more than The Walking Dead is because Thrones imploded in spectacular fashion, whereas the cracks in The Walking Dead had begun to form way, way earlier and just compounded over time. Having spent a good 3 years now chronicling the entire story of both the show and the comic, I've also seen a pretty funny emergence of survivorship bias. Back in the season 1 to 5 videos, I was a crazy fan gushing about everything who needed to shut up. By season 10 though, I am either A, the most jaded person on the internet just farming hate clicks because that is definitely what my channel is about and I don't have genius in every title of the video, or B, I am 100% based. This show fell off and it's so bad. But okay, while I joke about it, I think the worst part is the fact that most people nowadays are just completely indifferent. People still talk about how much Game of Thrones fumbled the bag, but The Walking Dead is already an IP that every normie Reddit thread has almost forgotten. It's that one show that everyone watched at some point, then they kinda disliked it, but eventually they just completely forgot about it, and it's like, oh, it's still going? Loving it or hating it still means that people are invested in actually seeing it succeed. Indifference is the thing that actually kills an IP. I've been very animated in this video, and I might have misled you into thinking that I'm super mad about his failure and that I hate it and that it's super bad, but after The Ones Who Live, I'm not really mad at all. I'm not even disappointed, to be honest with you. I'm sort of just indifferent. Michonne and Rick were those two final remaining things that I was really looking forward to as classic The Walking Dead. It started off relatively strong, but very quickly the story saw exactly the same problems as the main show. And because of that, there's really not much else for me to look forward to. And keep in mind, like now, there is actually no source material for everything that we're seeing. I should be excited, but I'm just not. The illusion of danger, the illusion of this world, it's been broken. I followed the series for 14-ish years now, almost 2/3 of my life, but in terms of new material, this is where I think I drop off. I don't want to make this overly dramatic or anything, because regardless of what new nonsense they cook up, the first seasons are still some of my favorite stories ever told, and I still aim to finish the last bits of the retrospective for the comic's sake. But as of now, and I'd be ecstatic if this aged like milk, I do not see a bright future for the TV universe. I made a similar video a few years ago going over the main drop-off points of the original show, but that was a very, very different time, and the show is still ongoing. So, I guess I want to ask all the same questions again. Are you still watching? Is it just sunk cost fallacy like it was with me? Or maybe you're really enjoying the pseudo-reboot era? If you dropped off, when and why? If you say Glenn and Negan, is it really Glenn? Or is it just because season 7 was a complete mess afterwards? I'm really curious about this stuff because I still don't quite believe people when they say they actually dropped off just because of Glenn. The reason why I think that is because like Game of Thrones also had really, really big character deaths and people were very, very mad about them, but like no one actually dropped off, you know, because the show was good. But whatever the case, let me know where you stand and whether or not I'm completely off base. Oh, and also, if you don't even know what The Walking Dead is, I hope you had a very nice lunch. I recommend reading the comic book. It's very good. And that's the video. This one turned out to be much longer, but also much shorter than I expected. I rewatched the whole show again while editing this, so it must have been like 3-4 times now, and yeah, I think my thoughts won't really change much on it. Episode 1 was solid, episode 2 was mostly solid, but everything after that felt like a awkward stumble to the finish line. But hey, at least the final scene was very cute. I think episode 4's writing was also strong, but the thing is, the entire story is so telegraphed that none of it really meant anything, to me at least. I remember when I watched the first trailers, I had a brief sense of them trying something like super spicy and like one of them would make it, sort of like what we see in the book. But yeah, no, they just played it super safe, and yeah, the whole thing is super telegraphed. And also, I can't believe I have to say this, but people are once again roasting a kid like RJ's actor. First of all, it's the director's job to make them act properly. Rick and Michonne's lines were equally bad, and they're adults and they're very good actors. Clearly, this is not an acting issue. Number 2, roasting a kid is mega cringe. Stop being a man-child, grow up. But anyway, this is the outro and now 30 more minutes of my rambling. So I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest members of the team, Tom Murray and Franklin Stone. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my ramblings, so seriously, thank you. My voice is really starting to go, so I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
If you want to release your music on Spotify, Apple Music, TikTok, Instagram, and all the other music stores, you need a distributor. And my favorite is DistroKid. When I'm ready to go live, DistroKid makes it effortless. I hit upload, select my platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, TikTok, input my artist name and release date, then I upload the tracks and my cover art that captures the vibe of my music, and I might add extras to extend my reach. After hitting submit, my music is out in the world, so I can get back to doing what I love, writing my next song.
Face he is working with. Number 63. Nicotero also bases the zombies' look on artist and illustrator Charlie Adler's drawings of the zombies in the original comic. Number 64.
The situation was handled.
Pick me!
Yeah!
Previously on Dr. Jordan Breeding.
Did you hear that, dude?
Previously.
Back to Nest HQ and Francis.
Makes sense?
Yep.
Between them, they killed a whole bunch of Nazis. Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host, Paul, and in this video, we're breaking down the Fellowship of the Ring. The Lord of the Rings is one of my favourite trilogies ever, and I can't wait to unpack this incredible film. We will of course be doing the extended edition, which is easily the best way to watch it. Now, one does simply not break down a movie, and I've also read through the book as well. As with House of the Dragon, I'll be discussing some of the major passages, and what we learn as well as how the movie handled things differently. So come with me as the road goes ever on, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. We will of course be doing all 3 films, and I'd love to have you as part of